As an operations pastor, I know how hard it is to hire the right people. I also know how hard it is to hire the right people in ministry. That's why I'm thankful for my friends at the Vanderbloemen Search Group. They are the leading search firm for churches and faith-based organizations. Vanderbloemen prayerfully comes alongside your team to guide you through the search process and bring you great candidates that fit your church's unique needs. Visit vanderbloemen.com for more information. That's Vander, BLOEMEN.com.
Welcome to the unSeminary podcast. Are you looking for practical ministry help to drive your ministry further, faster? Have a sinking feeling that your ministry training didn't prepare you for the real world? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others in pursuit of stuff that we wish they had taught in seminary. Buckle up and let's get started with this week's unSeminary podcast.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the unSeminary podcast. Happy Thursday. We hope things are great with you this week at your church. We know that you've got a lot going on. We're honored that you would take some time out. There's lots of things you could be doing today. We're just privileged that you would put us in your ears and listen to today's conversation. Super excited to have Mike Bonem with us. He's an author, speaker, church leader, has wrote a book that you've probably heard of before. If you haven't, we're going to dig into a little bit today called Leading from the Second Chair. He served as an executive pastor, which I always love interacting with executive pastors. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Rich. It's great to be here and be a part of it.
I'm so glad that you've taken some time. You actually, for a while, you were a manager at McKinsey & Company as well. We were just talking about this before we started. That's a rare bird. I don't think I've ran into any other church leaders that worked for the management consulting firm McKinsey.
There probably are some somewhere. I'm not sure that I've run. Actually, one guy that I do know well that worked for McKinsey is Greg Hawkins, who is executive pastor at Willow Creek for a number of years.
Yes, right. So that gives you a sense. Not a lot. Greg's a great guy. This is fantastic. Why don't you give us kind of a bit of the Mike Bonem story, kind of compress it down, give us a sense of your background.
Sure. Well, like you said, McKinsey. So I actually started off career as an engineer and then went back to school and got an MBA and on to McKinsey. And that's really where I learned a lot about consulting and found out that through a series of I think, God-ordained events that a lot of what I had learned about consulting was applicable in a church environment. So I started doing, over 20 years ago, some consulting, organizational and strategy stuff with churches. And God opened some doors for me to write and then ultimately opened the door for me to go into this executive pastor role at the church that we were members of at the time. And so I served there for 11 years, and kind of the last chapter in that story, at least from a career standpoint, was stepping out of that role about almost 5 years ago to do the consulting and coaching work that I had been doing sort of part-time to do that full-time.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Very cool. Well, leading from the second chair, a lot of folks that are listening in are in that role. They're executive pastors or, some role that is like that. And that's a unique challenge. What have been some of those, as you've kind of dealt with a lot of executive pastors around,
right.
What would you say some of those common tensions or common, problems that come about when you want to really lead from that second chair?
Yeah, Rich, when Roger Patterson and I wrote this book on that subject, we framed it around three things that we think seem to be paradoxes for people in those second chair roles. And I think, and it's been 10 years since the book came out, I still hear people talking about the exact same tensions today.
Right.
The first one we call Subordinate-Leader. You know that you're not in the first chair role. You know you're not the senior pastor. And so you're a subordinate, and nobody likes that word, or few people like that word. But we know we're not in the first chair,
right?
And yet we're called to lead. We're called to use our gifts, and part of our gift is leadership. So what does it look like to lead well, but also be a loyal subordinate? The second tension that we talk about is we call deep and wide. It's most second chair folks that I know are expected to really get down into the details in at least some areas in the church. And if the church is huge, they may not, they may still have a lot of staff people who do much of the detail work. But you still have to get into some of those details. That's deep. And yet, to lead well in the second chair, you have to see the big picture. You have to be able to get up at the visionary level with your senior pastor and think wide. And so that's a tension. The third one we call Contentment-Dreaming. How can I be content with where God has placed me today, even if that's not exactly where I think that I want to be long term, and yet not give up on dreams about the future? I tell folks all the time, don't buy into the myth that the senior pastor is the only one who's allowed to dream, because I think that is a myth. I think we are supposed to dream together about where God is leading our church, and dream and let God influence our dreams about where he's leading us personally. Very cool.
Why don't we dig into each one of those? I think that'd be a great, it's a great framework there. Subordinate leader, I totally understand that, the tension that's there. Let's say there's a leader that's listening in today, maybe wrestling with that a little bit, feeling that tension of like, gosh, I'm just not sure, am I just supposed to say yes to everything that my senior guy says, or, the person I'm following? Help us flesh that out a little bit.
And I'll flesh it out with a chapter right from my story when I was first stepping into this role. I'd been in business, as I said, for a number of years. Had come to the church, or had gone into the role of the church really on sort of this part-time interim basis. I was at a season where I was trying to figure out what's next in my life.
Right.
And
just going to help out with a few things for a little bit.
Yeah, help out with a few things, right? And so after about 9 months, I really sensed that God might be leading me to stay in that role. And of course, that's churches and the senior pastor's prerogative to say yes or no.
Yes.
So I sat down with Barry Landrum, who was our senior pastor at the time, and we started talking about it. And I said, here's one thing that I know about me, and I won't be successful in this role. I won't be able to thrive in this role if we can't agree on this. Is it going to be okay for me to push back on you? Is it going to be okay for me to disagree and challenge at times? Mm-hmm. And what he said was really helpful to me. He said, Mike not only said, okay, I need that. Mm-hmm. I need someone, but as the conversation unfolded, what we talked about was, how do you do that in a way that's respectful?
Right.
How do you do that in a way that still honors his leadership? Mm-hmm. And so I felt enormous freedom with Barry to challenge and to disagree, but mostly behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. Most of what we worked out was in private or in very small meetings, because that's the way I could do it respectfully. Mm-hmm. And once we walked out with those, to the larger audience, I was going to get behind them.
Yeah, that's critical. I think, as someone who's led in that second chair, leads in that second chair, I think it's super important. You need to listen in on this, that a part of our job is to be publicly loyal to our, to our lead pastors, to our, senior pastors, to ensure that they see that we're going to take bullets for them. We're going to, help. That ultimately, when you're publicly loyal, that does create an environment when you're behind the closed door to say, I just don't understand why we're going in this direction, or help me think this through more, or I think we need to go this way, to actually help you lead, in your organization.
Yeah. No, one of the things we've talked a lot about in the book and in coaching that I do is, if you're not right in your relationship with your senior pastor, it doesn't matter how right you are on an issue.
So true.
Yeah. You got to get that relationship right first. And if you're seen as doing something that is disloyal, that is perceived as undermining them, you're wrong on the relationship, and then you quickly lose the ability to lead well in that second chair position.
Yeah, it seems like I would think of these three. The initial issue of subordinate leader is really where the tinder is for these relationships to blow up, right? If things are going to go sideways, it's going to be around this particular issue. And unfortunately, I've seen that where, the executive pastor, senior pastor, lead pastor, whatever you call them, those relationships really can come apart, and they really are around these issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right.
On the deep and wide issue, help us wrestle through that. So, the idea that, there are a few areas that we're probably going to have to drive deep in. What are those areas that you're seeing are pretty common among executive pastors to drive deep into?
I'm convinced, I'm going to avoid the question a little bit, Rich.
That's fine. Because it's an election year. You can do that.
Yeah, that's right. I'm convinced that there's more differences in executive pastor or second chair job descriptions than almost any other job description in the church. Mm-hmm. And so to say there's a common issue where everybody has to be deep, I wouldn't be true to what I really believe. I mean, right. they really are all over the map. Mm-hmm. Having said that, staff kind of personnel issues, most executive pastors have a pretty broad portfolio related to staff. Mm-hmm. And so knowing what's working, what's not working, you don't have to be an HR expert, but you better have good systems. And if you're not directly making it happen, overseeing to make sure that it's working well, especially in a large church environment. Mm-hmm. Some executive pastors I know need to be really deep on the financial side of things. Some don't touch the finances, but if the financial side, the business side of the church is part of your scope of responsibilities, knowing that really well is another area where you have to be deep. You can't just say, oh, on the budget, we're kind of within 10 or 20% of being right on this. It's like, no, that doesn't work.
That's not going to work. You can only do that for one cycle, and then you're done.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. There's an interesting tension here. I'd love you to help me understand this. A lot of times, organizations to grow, churches to grow, have to be about replicating leaders, right? You have to be finding ways to, replicate at every level, staff, volunteers, leaders. There can be a tendency as you climb up or climb down, whichever that, you call that, ladder, that there actually becomes less and less replication. So the kind of ultimate example is a lot of times the lead person in the church, they're the teacher, they're teaching 30 times a year, 40 times a year. And they're not really doing anything to replicate other teachers around them. How should we be thinking about replicating even at this level as an executive pastor, when a lot of the things we do, frankly, we don't want to necessarily just hand off to someone else. It's not like, say I'm a small group leader, or even, I'm in student ministry or some other area. How should we be thinking about that?
I think a couple of things, Rich. One is, I've seen churches that have gone from a two-person executive team, senior pastor, executive pastor, or lead pastor, executive pastor, to adding another person into the team. That's not exactly replication. I mean, that's really dividing the executive pastor job into two different parts, where one person might focus more on ministry and one more on the business side. But that is bringing somebody else in to allow that, which gives the church then the room, the capacity to continue to grow.
Yep.
The other is you can always be looking for those high potential leaders. And just bringing them, give them a delegated task to them. Say, look, I know you're not the HR expert, but I'd really like you to help take a hard look at our evaluation system.
Yes.
And in doing so, you're gonna to empower somebody, as well as increase your capacity as an executive pastor.
There seems to be a lot of executive pastors have the other duties as assigned category, right? There always seems to be, or a lot of times I'll hear executive pastors described as like, they'll rattle off their core function and then they'll be like, well, and then when anything comes up that's like different, like a project, that ends up being my responsibility. And that's a great area for, to pull people in. Like, hey, if you're, if you're going into something new at the church, hey, don't do it alone. Bring somebody else in who can help plug away. That could be a volunteer, or maybe, another staff member. Hey, you've got somebody, in your student ministry who seems to be a great up and coming leader. Why not bring them involved for 6 months? Say, hey, how can we shift around what you're doing so you can get plugged in on this special project, that we're pushing away on? Yeah, no, that's great. One
of the things we talk about in that deep and wide is that executive pastors are often gap fillers, and that's one of the phrases we use, right, for that. For that, all other duties may be assigned.
Yep.
The reality about gap filling is there's always lots of gaps in any church, lots of things that need to be done, but that doesn't mean that the executive pastor has to do all of them by him or herself.
Right, absolutely.
And so I tell folks all the time, fill the gaps, but sometimes you fill it with other people. Sometimes you fill it not today, but tomorrow. Focus on the things that need to be done right now and that only you can do, and then figure out ways to hand off some of the rest of that.
Absolutely. The contentment dreaming kind of paradox there, that I think is the most, I would say, pastoral part of what I shouldn't say most pastoral. It's a pastoral word that as we're wrestling with our internal issues around, hey, what am I content where I'm at here? Are we content with where we're going today with what's happening versus where's God calling us? How does that work out? What are some of the ways that executive pastors are working out this last paradox?
I think that we spend a lot of time, and I continue to spend a lot of time on that whole issue of what does it look like to be content with where I am right now. A danger of contentment is I slip off into complacency.
Yep.
And that's not good. That's not what you want. That's not what God wants for your church or for your role. The other danger is that you become just discontent, and then then you're running into all sorts of friction. To me, one of the keys to contentment is trying to take a bigger picture look and say, God doesn't operate on my timeline.
Right.
And so God may be at work in ways that I can't see right now, or on a timeline that I don't understand, that's a lot, different than mine. And just being willing to kind of get up, at least for for today and say, I'm going to pray and trust that God's in this for me. The definition we use on contentment is that it's a choice. You really have to make a choice to be content, right? I'm going to look at the glass as half full, not as half empty. It's a choice to stay and to grow and to excel for a season.
Yep.
I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to do my very best, and I'm going to trust that even if there's some things I don't like, that God really is going to teach me, and I'm going to be able to grow in that, at least for this season. And then God may move me on beyond that.
Very cool. Well, the book came out, I can't believe it was 10 years ago, but it came out 10 years ago. Hugely influential book. What has evolved in your thinking? Kind of where, and are you, pulling that together in any way? What is it kind of, gone, in over the last 10 years as you've kind of thought through these issues?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, I've had lots of conversations with second chair folks and others over those 10 years. And so I've just finished the manuscript for a new book called called Thriving in the Second Chair. And it's 10 years worth of conversations. It's everything that I've learned that I wish I had said in the first book or that I'd like to say now. And really the central idea is it's great to lead, but too many second chairs that I run into, I would say, are surviving, but they're not really thriving. And what are the practices that you need to have in place if you're going to really thrive in the second chair?
Very cool. So you're hoping that'll, any timeline on that book coming out?
Yeah, it comes out in September.
Wow, 2016. That's amazing. That's great.
So just a few months away.
Great. Well, so everybody, if you haven't read the first book, you're going to want to get that, pick that up, Leading from the Second Chair, so then you can jump into Thriving in the Second Chair, when that comes out, later this year. Mike, anything else you'd like to share before we pivot on to the rest of our episode?
Gosh, I just and I want to take one page out of the Thriving book and offer this for your audience. One of the things that I've become deeply convinced of is that second chair leaders tend to be very isolated. They just tend to be alone. They're surrounded by people all the time, and yet they don't have anybody to really talk to about the challenges and the difficulties, the struggles they're having in the second chair. Sometimes the struggles are with the senior pastor. You try to talk with him, and we're still having to work through that. Who else do I talk to? Well, if I talk to the people who work for me, that's not appropriate.
Right.
If I go and try to talk to a key person in the church, they're often going to want to fix the problem for me. And that's not really what I need. I need just somebody to help me process stuff through with. And usually that's outside. And yet we're so busy with our jobs, we don't have those people on the outside that we can work through. And so I think the thing I would say, like I said, this is one of the chapters in the new book, is you've got to find some friends. You've got to find those helpful, safe outlets, ideally people who actually understand something about the unique challenges of being in the second chair, and develop those deep relationships with them so that when you are hitting those hard times, because we all hit those hard times, you have a good place to work through that with.
This is the unSeminary podcast. Stuff you wish they taught in seminary.
Well, we're going to jump into the lightning round, that part of the episode where we ask similar questions. Everybody that's on the show today has been a great conversation with Mike Bonem, a great author, leader, consultant. I've just been so glad to have you on the episode today.
Sure.
Mike, what is an online resource that you're using that's helping you?
I know many of your audience have probably been using Evernote for a while, but gosh, I love Evernote.
Yes,
it is so helpful to me. I started using it about 3 or 4 years ago, and just continues to be huge. I've also recently started experimenting a little bit with Time Trade.
Yes.
It's an online scheduling, and it just lets me send an email out and say, hey, I need to schedule a meeting with you, and it links into my calendar and it shows them what's available, and then they can just click and it pops up onto my calendar and there. So that's a cool resource.
Yeah, Time Trade's fantastic. I use it for scheduling these interviews, and for a number of other, kind of phone call things, and it's fan. I literally just this week was talking to a pastor, church planner, who's like, I want to meet with all these people, but I'm stuck in all this, trying to schedule him is so much time. Obviously, his church planner doesn't have time to hire an assistant, can't afford an assistant.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, use Time Trade, and you could literally say, okay, I'm going to be at this Starbucks on Wednesday nights, and I can book, 1 hour meetings, and you just send that out to people, and it'll tell the people where it is, and, book it in the calendar. That's fantastic. Yeah. Great tool. What's a book you've read in the last, 6 months to a year that's had an impact on your thinking or ministry?
Two come to mind, Rich. It's really going to be three, but I ran across Brené Brown's work a couple of years ago. Like a lot of people, somebody said you got to watch this TED Talk, and so I did, and read Daring Greatly, right after that. And then she's got a new book out called Rising Strong. And I think what she says, even though it's not written specifically for, ministers and church leaders, but gosh, what she says about being willing to lean into vulnerability and dealing with shame and some of our emotional issues is huge. A real different one. I read Eric McTax's book, Amazing Grace, about William Wilberforce. And I was just inspired at what God can do through one person who's really committed to doing whatever God wants him to do, and not in it, not so much about building, my kingdom, but, God, how do you want to use me? And wow, what an inspirational story.
Very cool. That's great. Great stuff. What's another ministry you're looking to? You obviously have exposure to a lot of churches across the country. What is another ministry you're looking at that's inspiring you?
Yeah, a number come to mind, but one that popped into my mind is Church of the Resurrection, United Methodist Church up in the Kansas City area. And what I like a lot of things about them, but a couple of things specifically. A lot of people who are not in mainline churches kind of look at the mainline denominations and say, nothing good is happening there at all. Boy, that is an amazing church. Right. Adam Hamilton and the team there do some really powerful ministry. And just to see that in a mainline setting, I think is really encouraging. And I love that they have a heart for their own tribe. And so, their big conference is it's not limited to other Methodist church leaders, but it's really geared towards how can we take what we've learned and specifically strengthen a lot of churches that are frankly struggling in their own mainline context. So I really admire what they do there. Yeah.
Very cool. That's very cool. Need to check them out. If you could get 15 minutes with any leader alive today, who would that be and why?
The one who comes to mind immediately for me is Bill Hybels. And I'm sure others, on this podcast have mentioned him. And again, a lot of different reasons. But one of the things I particularly admire is his longevity.
So true.
It's one thing to build a great organization. It's another thing to build a great organization that lasts for a long period of time, to stick with it through good times and bad times, to just stay really faithful in that. And, I really admire that about him, and would love to sit down with him, like you said, for 15 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's definitely getting to that category of leader like Billy Graham, where you say, man, integrity, obviously he's obviously had a huge integrity, but just the length of that integrity, just continues to just build momentum, for your respect for, a guy like Hybels obviously had huge impact around the world for sure. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show today. I know, you're busy consulting, coaching, writing. When you just want to kick back, have some fun, what do you do just for fun in life?
I'm a runner. I've been a runner for all of my life. So
nice.
I'm not one of these guys who says I have to go out and run. I'm more like I get to, because it's actually fun and relaxing. Nice. And cool. For me. And I love the outdoors, which is incredibly ironic because I live right in the middle of Houston. And so it's like humidity capital. And no, there aren't any great, huge parks around us. But whenever I can really get away from Houston, be outdoors, I like that. And of course, I love spending time with my family. Our kids are all adult or close to adult. And so whenever we can all be together is really rewarding for me.
Very cool. Well, Mike, I appreciate being on the show today. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about, your writing and that, how can they do that?
Yeah, easiest thing is to hop on my website, MikeBonem.com. First name, last name.com.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate you being on the show.
I was going to say, email is Mike@MikeBonem.com.
Oh, okay, great. Perfect. Great. Everybody can email Mike. That would be good. Yeah, that's right. Appreciate you being on the show today.
Hey, Rich, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Don't be shy. We'd love to connect. Check out unSeminary Inbox. You can sign up at unSeminary.com, and we'll send you helpful training resources every week. Plus, you'll gain immediate access to our exclusive members area with tons of resources you can use. Connect with Rich on Twitter @RichBirch or through email, rich@unseminary.com. Don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at unseminary.com. It includes links to what we talked about today and more. Leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Did you enjoy today's episode? Drop by iTunes and leave a review. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Join us next week when we'll learn more stuff we wish they taught in seminary.